good morning. Thank you so much for joining me today on this SpouseLink live stream, talking about the impact of loneliness on transitioning military spouses with Marinelle Reynolds. She's an LCSW, which is a licensed counselor of social work. I'm very excited for today's topic and for today's conversation. So now we've all felt lonely at one time or another. Like maybe you didn't connect with other people at some party you went to, or you drop your kids off at playgroup and the parents there just aren't maybe your people, or you didn't fit in with the team at work. Everybody else seemed to be besties around the water cooler and you're like, I am not fitting in here. So loneliness is really not about just being physically alone. It's about feeling understood and cared about by the people that surround you. When you're transitioning your family, your military family, out of active duty service, it can be an incredibly lonely experience. You might be the only person in your group of friends going through this at that time. And when you're immersed in a lifestyle and a community, it just creates a natural rhythm. There's expectations, there's activities that you feel like you can count on. And when you lose that sense of belonging, it really can impact your physical and your mental health, and then just add incredible amounts of stress to your transition experience. So this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I really wanted to talk about loneliness as a factor in the transition process, especially for military spouses, because a lot of time our service members are so immersed in what they're doing to get out of their active duty status, and they're still going to work, and they're part of SkillBridge, or they're taking their SFL taps, or they've got their military service member friends that are kind of supporting them and asking them questions, but the spouse is kind of left high and dry without a lot of resources to have help from. So anyhow, I'm not going to talk all day. I want to bring my guest on. I should probably introduce myself really quick. I'm Anna Larson. I am a retired military spouse as of 1 year. I am also the SpouseLink Ambassador for retiring and transitioning military spouses. And we don't make a distinction, because whether you're leaving the military after 5 years or if you're leaving it after 22 years, really a lot of the same feelings and processes apply. And so I joined SpouseLink as an ambassador to talk about these things, because our transition out of the military was less than ideal. It was difficult. I struggled a lot. I didn't know where to find the resources. And so because of that, we've started bringing these live streams and some blog articles to SpouseLink to support military spouses that are going through the same thing. All right, I'm going to bring up my slides here, and we are going to introduce my guest. So Marinelle Reynolds is the owner, and she's also a psychotherapist and consultant at eRemedy Counseling and Consulting, LLC. She's a licensed clinical social worker in California, Georgia, Texas, and New Jersey. She's currently living in New Jersey. Private practice owner and clinical quality lead at Lyra Health. And she specializes in working with stressed out high achievers and organizational leaders, and then helps them learn to live and lead with courage, compassion, and integrity. She has spent the last 2 decades working in the behavioral health field. So we've got somebody that knows what she is talking about. She has her master's of social work from Michigan State University, is currently working on her doctoral degree at the University of Pennsylvania. And she's very interested in researching belonging within the military spouse population to reduce social isolation and improve emotional resiliency and health. Marinelle is a guest reviewer for the Journal of Social Service Research. She's been a guest on All Things Considered, NPR. She's also been featured in NBC News, Elite Daily, and Bustle. She's been a speaker and trainer for organizations like the National Association for Social Workers, University of California, the United Health Group, and all of the United States Air Force as well. She's a board member for the Military Spouse Behavioral Health Clinicians Network, co-leads Hiring Our Heroes, and advocates for the National Military Family Association. So this woman has been all over the place, done all the things. She is so highly qualified to bring this conversation to us today. And then 2 things I want to mention at the end. She's also the 2020 AMC Air Force Joan Orr Spouse of the Year, and she's joining us. And even when she's not been feeling well, she's been sick for the last week. And instead of canceling, Marinelle has agreed to join us today, and I'm so excited. So I'm going to bring her on. We're just going to say hello. Hi, Marinelle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. I just reading your bio just reminded me of just what an impressive person you are. You have done so
Oh,
much during your time frame in your career.
thank you. Thank you so much. And, I've had really amazing mentors and different opportunities that have opened up. And being a military spouse and working as a military spouse has been really challenging. And just really taking opportunities when I can have them has
Yeah.
been, even when I don't feel like when I feel like I might be taking a step back in my career, I will take the opportunity to see what happens. So I lean in instead of closing the door, because we never know what's going to happen with military life, right? Like you don't know how long your stay is going to be. You don't know what opportunities are going to come up. So whatever comes up, I'm usually game to try something, even if I haven't done it before.
Right? Agreed. I think the one thing you said that is absolute is you never know what's going to happen in military life. So when you think you're going to do something and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, nope, I
Yeah,
guess not. That's not
yeah.
happening.
I guess that's not the path for me. Maybe I will see what else comes up. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Well, we've got some people joining us today. I'm so excited that everyone is here live. If you want to just drop in, say hello, tell us where you're joining from. Tell us what you think about today's topic. We've got a couple of people that just came in. Yes, important and overlooked topic, especially from the retiring or retired service member perspective. So I'm really excited about our conversation today, Marinelle. And when it comes to retirement, which I've been through in transition, which can happen at any time, right? A med board, an ETS out of active duty service, there's this massive change that occurs. You're saying goodbye to like, it's not just saying goodbye to like a location, like when you PCS and your friends that you've made there, but you think you might see later down the road. It's like an entire lifestyle going away. It's
Yeah.
the stability of a career that's now leaving. It's this community you've been immersed in. And we all know that military life is not just like a something that you can be like, oh yeah, and we're military. It's something that I do in my off time, right? I mean, it is what your family lives because you're living through the deployments, the training exercises, the long hours at work, all of those kinds of things. And so finding your way through that can be really hard, right? Military spouses feel just a certain way about all that. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation today is because I think it can be incredibly, incredibly lonely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Blue Star families had recently put out their annual Blue Star Family Survey, where they survey thousands of military spouses and families, right? And
Yeah.
they found that only 1 in 5 military spouses feel a sense of belonging. Like you
Wow.
think about how many, there's like almost a million of us, and I think there like was almost 8,000 military spouses or families that were surveyed, and 1 in 5 feel a sense of belonging, and that is incredibly heartbreaking if you think about it. Given that we're in a community, a military community that has so many programs that are geared towards increasing connection and community, but it's not like translating to military families and spouses.
Yeah.
And then you think about families that are transitioning out of the military community and losing also that sense of connection. On top of that, it can imagine it would be a large majority of us.
Yeah.
And Humana Military did a survey and found that 90% of military spouses feel a sense of loneliness. And when we think of loneliness, it's not like this um, solitude where there's like this kind of sense of peace. There's when we talk about loneliness is like this feeling sense that something is missing, right?
Mhm.
So 90% of military spouses feel a sense of loneliness compared to the national average of about 60%.
Wow.
So 1 in 5 feel a sense of belonging, and 90% of us feel some kind of loneliness.
That's pretty amazing statistics right there. I mean, that's very telling. I mean, if you really are thinking about what that means in the bigger picture of the number of military spouses this affects. And so, okay, so I'm going to back up just a little. Let's talk a little bit about what you mean by belonging. Okay,
Yeah.
let's start there. Let me throw this up. This first question: what does it mean to belong to something? And then we can get into the impact and like when you don't have that, what it does to you, right?
Right, right. So belonging is more than just like membership in a community. It's more than just like our identity. And there's lots of different groups that identify and define belonging in different ways. But generally, there's an integrative definition of belonging that suggests that it's a subjective feeling that someone is a vital part of their surrounding system.
Mm.
And when we think about systems, we're people within like a context, right? We're not isolated silos. It's not just our family. It's our family within the military community, within the neighborhood, within the civilian community, within the greater world, right? So we have all these systems that are in place. So it's feeling like we are a vital part of all of these systems, and
Mm.
all of these systems kind of play together. And when we think about belonging, belonging is this dynamic feeling and experience that comes out of four interrelated components. So one is our motivation. So our personality, our inner drive, like some people are more social than others. Like some people are like more introverted, right? So some of it's like our personality and our internal motivation. Perceptions also plays into belonging, and that like how we see something, the meanings that we attribute to what's going on, feedback mechanisms that might be happening, our relational competencies, so our emotional intelligence, our relational skills and abilities, and then also opportunities, so the our environments and the things that enable us to connect and have these belonging experiences, and the removal of barriers, right? So when we think about barriers, there can be different things. Like we can think about how most adults and people find a sense of belonging at work and at home, right? And so if
Yeah.
you're looking at military spouses, we have a higher rate of unemployment. So that takes out one part of where most adults find a sense of belonging in the workplace. And then you look at home, and home is in the military life is constantly changing. Like where we live is changing. Sometimes our partners may or may not be available. The dynamics within the home is constantly changing. So it makes sense that these opportunities may also be impacting military spouses' sense of belonging.
So all of these different systems in place for a military spouse, they're not the standard system. There's some unique component that makes it less stable, I would say, maybe than what you're talking about for just if we, general population kind of thing, because we can't live where we want to live in we can't always live in the community we want to live in. Heck, we can't even always live in the houses we want to live in, right?
Right, right.
And then all these other components that you're talking about, inability to work because we're moving every couple of years, or to find a job where you feel satisfied, or to find people that you really connect with at every duty station. This is fast. Like we know this, right? This is one of the reasons this is something we talk about as military spouses all the time. Like, this is why we're the resilient ones. We're strong. We can get through this kind of thing. But what you're saying is that what it affects our ability to feel understood, like we have a place.
Right. To feel, so we have a fundamental need as humans to feel a sense of belonging, to feel seen and understood, and to feel like we're a vital part of something. There's a mutuality to
Yeah.
it, right? And just like food, clothing, and shelter are basic human needs, like a sense of belonging is also a basic human need. That in the absence of belonging, there is pain and suffering. And
Yeah.
like actually, which is pretty crazy, that like neuroscientists have done like brain scans, right? And
Yeah.
they have scanned the brains of people who have experienced ostracism or social isolation. So be like the ultimate experience of not belonging, right?
Yeah.
And the same parts of their brain that register physical pain, like getting punched in the gut, light up when we experience social like ostracism or
Wow.
isolation. Right. So the act of like not belonging is physically painful. Like our brain registers it as physical pain. So we have all sorts of like physical outcomes because of that too, right? So
Yeah.
we have this fundamental need to belong, and there's these four components that play into feeling a sense of belonging. And when we think about how important belonging is, and you know that this is not something just in the military, it's organizations that are looking towards increasing inclusion and belonging. It's an expectation in the workplace and also in the military. There's all sorts of like family support programs that are geared towards increasing a sense of belonging. But I think what happens is sometimes we only focus on one piece of that component, right? We look for opportunities. Well, let's have like a morale barbecue, and then everyone will feel like we belong, right? Like we're
Mandatory fun. I do.
yes, yes. Let's get voluntold to go to this picnic, right?
Right.
Right. So, but that's just one part of it, right? So
Yeah.
I think like when we think about a sense of belonging, one, it's not just about like the connection or the opportunity or like the happy hour. It's about these internal motivations, how we see it, our relational components,
Mm.
but it's also the quality of the relationship and like the social capital, that there's this reciprocity, that there's this idea that there's a give and take, that there's this mutual benefit within the relationship.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're talking about relationships, this you just beautifully led into the second question that I had for you, which is let's talk about the relationships that are important for well-being, right? I mean, there's this poem that's all about like every in the season of your life, right? As a military spouse, there's seasons of friendships where you find that friend that's like the person you put on your kids, like emergency contact form. You just met them. You're not actually friends, but they're there for a purpose, right?
Yeah.
You serve a
Yeah.
purpose for each other. And then you've got the friends that are like, they're there because you're both involved in the FRG or this certain volunteer activity. But again, that connection you're talking about isn't necessarily there. And then there's the friends where it's like long lost family. You found them, your hearts connect, and they're your bestie. And it doesn't matter where you live in the world, you're going to stay in connection with them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So are these the kind of relationships that you're talking about, or is it something bigger or different than what I'm thinking?
Yeah, no, I think it's really similar, right? And that it's not the number of people, right, or the number of events that we're going to. It's about the quality of it, right? So
Yeah.
when we think about social capital, it's this ability for people to work together for a shared purpose, right? For groups and organizations and people. So there is this like reciprocity. There's a give and take in the relationship. And when we think about the quality of the relationships that are growth fostering, there's like mutual empathy, there's mutual empowerment. There is like a give and take to the quality of the relationship.
Mhm.
So Shasta Nelson did this great TED talk on friendimacy. I highly recommend that TED talk. But she talks about this like the intimacy within friendship, this triangle. And she talks about how within these like deeper growth fostering relationships, there's three qualities. At the base of it is positivity. So we have to like the people that we're hanging out with. There has to be, right? There has to be like some kind of joy or like happy feeling that we get when we're around them,
Right.
right? And then we have consistency. So there's like this expectation, there's this routine to it, because consistency creates like a sense of safety. We know what to expect, right? So think about school. When we were in school, we went to the same class every day. We had the same kind of time frame. We had the same people around us. The
Yeah.
consistency was built, right? When we think about where we're living on base, like if we're going when we're at a club, we meet at the same time. We talk about like the similar issues, right? So there's a sense of consistency which creates trust. And then we have vulnerability.
Mm.
So the willingness to allow people to see us, to really see us. And that's where a lot of relationships can kind of wobble, is in the vulnerability. And that's the hallmark of growth fostering relationships, right?
Okay.
Because when we're in a relationship, we're often in this central paradox where we want connection and intimacy, but to be really seen is really scary,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so we do things to protect ourselves because remember, disconnection creates pain. So we're like protecting. It's an instinct for us. So we
And
do things that keep ourselves out of authenticity. We hide pieces of ourselves in order for us to be accepted.
yes, I want to be like, yes, 100%, yes, right? And I feel like there's an added impact when you're a military spouse because there's this question where you say to yourself, is it worth it for me to
Yes.
do this right now? Right?
Yeah.
We're PCSing in 4 months. Is it worth it for me to put myself out there? No.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Totally.
Or this person is leaving, or I mean, what, or our schedules aren't quite aligning. I could change it, but it's exhausting or draining, right? Like and maybe that's not unique to military spouses, but I feel like I've been in the military world for so long that I don't really know what it's not like, what it's like to not be a military spouse, right? So I feel
Right.
like there's that added thing where we say, is it worth it based on where our life circumstances are at and what's coming quickly next for us? And
Totally.
like blocks our ability then to develop that deeper relationship, and that impacts then the amount of loneliness we feel because we don't have those connections you're talking about.
Right, right. Like those are like strategies that we use to protect ourselves because, for a lot of us, like at a fundamental part, when those strategies for protection or strategies of disconnection came up, it was a protective function, right? So there was a reason why those came up. It's a way for us to protect ourselves from the pain of disconnection.
Yeah.
And so when that comes up for military spouses, we can get to the point where we're like, well, I've had this experience where I tried to fit in, and maybe I'm not like the perfect military spouse. Like for me, I'm a working spouse. I don't fit the typical the typical experience for a lot of them. My husband's enlisted, so I may not fit in with another group of people. Like depending on basis, some people have very different experiences, right?
Yeah.
Between I'm a person of color. So like there can be lots of experiences of not belonging that can reinforce someone to feel like, well, I need to protect myself because I don't want to feel ostracized again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or it can also go into, I know the pain of losing a friend, like that one mom that like totally got it, that like we were like BFFs and besties, we did everything together, and then she had to move or I had to move, right? And so we experienced loss. So to prepare us or to guard us from the experience of loss, we disconnect, right? So we do all these things to protect it. We want connection, but we disconnect to protect ourselves from feeling that pain, right?
Absolutely.
And so when we think about all of that, one is we may not have been, it may not be our fault for the reason why we feel disconnect or we've experienced disconnection, but we still have to do something about it anyways, right?
Yeah.
And so when we think about the kinds of relationships we need, is having growth fostering relationships, but also thinking of like different kinds of relationships, like what you were mentioning. So we can think of it like in three concentric circles. One is like what you were talking about, like our ride or dies, our besties, the ones that we can like go, like if I needed to hide a body, they would help me hide the body, right?
I've
They
got
might like give me a hard time, but like they have my back no matter what, right?
they come with the black face paint and the,
Yeah.
mask, and they're like,
They'll
where are
help you right
we
there.
going?
No questions asked, right?
Right.
And those are our intimate connections. And we need people like that because they love us not in spite of our imperfections, but because of them. The weird things that we do, it's like the things that endear us to them, right?
Right.
Those are our ride or dies. Then we have our relational connections. And those are the people that we can ask for a cup of milk. If I need a ride to the doctor, they're like tangible. That's like the people that we share a sense of reciprocity. There's a give and take to
Okay.
that, right?
Yeah.
And then we have our collective connections. This is like our identity as like a person of color, a military spouse, active duty military veterans. Like these are our collective connections. So there's this mutual like a thing that we enjoy together. There's like
Mhm.
a purpose, right? So we need all three to have a sense of belonging. And so when we think about a sense of loneliness, one, we think about that triangle. Is there positivity? Like, I just don't, there's nothing I'm really enjoying with people, right? Is there consistency? And is there vulnerability? And where in this circle do I need to pull closer, right? Because we need these ride or dies in our life. But if we're thinking about us as military spouses, like, really our ride or dies are the people within our house. And if my husband's my ride or die, and if he's like deployed, he's not here, right? So I need more ride or dies close
Yeah.
to me, right? So
Yeah.
how can I pull the people that are in the outside circle closer so that I don't have just one person within this like inner circle?
Yeah. Do you find that it's especially difficult for military spouses to find those ride or dies because we are short termers in terms of where we're living, where we're being, and for the transitioning spouse, right? Like now that's something where we're now looking at being in a community long term, and it's a totally different thought process for finding friends.
Right,
I'm
right.
I'm s I'm still pretty much just associated with the people that I knew when we were active duty still. I don't have a ton of other friends outside there. I haven't opened that circle in that sense. And so is that something now that, like, a transitioning spouse really needs to start looking at and thinking about and actively practicing then in order to keep that loneliness and that sense of belonging there and the loneliness away?
I think that's a really good question. And that for a lot of us, sometimes our identity can be attached to the military community, even though we're kind of adjunct, right? Which makes it difficult as a military spouse because we're not really in the military, but we are part of the military.
Yeah.
And like command has influence over us, even though they technically don't, but they do, right?
Yeah.
So we're in this weird kind of ambiguous space. And so there's this movement that I've noticed on social media that's talking about like more than just a military spouse. And this
Yes.
is something that is helpful for us no matter where we are. This is helpful in transitions, right? So if we're thinking about empty nesters or like kids that are like going from home into the school, or us moving from not working to working, or working to retiring, we think about how we identify ourselves, right? And that's that collective connection, like our identity. I identify as a social worker, as a person of color, but there's this like intersectionality to who we are. We are more than just one part,
Yeah.
right? And so part of that is like leaning in with some curiosity to ask yourself, like, who are you? What are the different parts of you that make up that collective connection? And seeing like where you can develop and foster those relationships. Leaving the military or retiring from the military, transitioning, doesn't mean that you leave that part of who you are or that identity. That will always be part of who you are, right? So it's not necessarily about leaving that community. It is about folding in other parts of yourself too.
Mm, yeah, that makes sense, and that's another big piece that you go through as a transitioning spouse, like reimagining and recreating this identity of who you are,
Yeah,
right? Because
expanding, right? And reminding yourself that you're more than just this one piece.
yeah,
Right? That you're not like, we can see this for people who have, I work with a lot of perfectionists and high achievers. And a lot of times our if we're leaning towards perfection, our like mood is attached to achievement. So if I'm doing well at work, then that means I feel good, right?
mhm,
But part of it is like expanding how we see ourselves and how we identify ourselves, that we are more than just what we do at work. We are more than just who we are to our spouse or who we are to our kids. We're all of these things.
yeah,
And if you look at all of those things, then we can look at like different connections or places that you can connect, and looking at that it's not just about opportunities, right? It's not just about going out and meeting people and networking. It's about looking at our internal motivations, like our personality types, what kinds of like people we lean towards, like how motivated we are. Do we feel like our number of connections feels sufficient? Because
Yeah.
so one person may feel like I need a bazillion, I need 500 connections, right?
Right.
And somebody's like, no, I'm good with one in each section, right? In each circle, right?
Yeah.
So you're really asking yourself, what do you need? I
Yeah.
think is really important. Instead of like society telling us you need all these numbers and these connections to feel a sense of belonging. It's not about that. It's the connection and the quality
Right.
of
So if
the
you feel
relationship.
good with your one person each one and you feel satisfied and happy with where you're at, you
Right.
don't have to kill yourself to continue to put yourself out there. It's okay to just be who you are where you're at.
Right.
I love that thought. And that's not something we get told very often, which is one of the reasons I love that thought. It's like you should do more. You need another friend. You should be part of this. You should be doing that, right?
Right. Right. I would
Okay.
say that if we're feeling a sense of loneliness, it's our body signaling to us that something's off, right? Because if our instinct is to belong, when we feel lonely or ostracized, it's like saying, we don't, this need is not being met, right? So it's a signal. So if we're feeling lonely, then maybe it's taking a look at the quality of the relationships
Mm.
and seeing which one we need to tweak.
I'm
Which
gonna
one are we
steal
wanting to invest
I'm
in?
gonna steal that as a sound bite. I love that. The quality of the relationship is what is really like the fundamental important piece of it, right? Because
Right.
you can have 1,000 connections, but still feel
And
lonely.
still feel lonely. You can be in a party, right? Filled with a bunch of people and
That you
still
know.
feel, yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes. Okay, so love this conversation. Let's get into like some of the physical and mental, like I guess like the impact, the physical and mental impact when you are feeling lonely. What is happening to your body? What is happening to you mentally?
So it's super crazy, right? So this is where I'm going to try really hard not to nerd out on the research because, like, I could totally nerd out on the research on this. But okay, so loneliness is one of the social determinants for health, meaning like the Department of Health has identified that feeling a sense of loneliness has like direct relation to how we're physically doing. Because
Mm,
what they found in a bunch of studies is that when we have chronic loneliness, there are higher risks of heart disease, high blood pressure, stroke, depression, anxiety, and morbidity, early death, essentially.
wow.
Isn't that crazy? And like a meta-analysis of like 7 studies found that loneliness and not belonging is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day or obesity.
What are you?
Right? Like there's like actual physical ramifications in our bodies when we feel loneliness, right? When we feel this chronic sense of not belonging. And what's also interesting is that this the effects of belonging and like not belonging related stressors is actually more intense for marginalized populations. So people like BIPOC populations, LGBTQ populations, people who might act or socialize differently than the norm. So people who have like mental health disorders or disabilities, right? So
Mhm.
marginalized communities are proportionately more affected. So there are higher rates of heart disease and stroke and things like that. So like the stressors related to not belonging are actually more profound in marginalized communities.
Would you throw military spouses kind of in that same bailiwick as far I mean, we're not considered a marginalized community in the traditional sense, but would you say then that military spouses, simply because of the lifestyle that we live and these influencing factors that basically control what we can and cannot do in some situations?
I think that there's a higher risk of it just because there's so much inconsistency and instability, right? That if we're looking to work and home as a place to find a sense of belonging, and that's constantly changing, and it's like work, home, church, and community are the top 4 places that we find belonging. But like in military, all 4 of those things are constantly changing on average every 2 to 3 years, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as you get settled and start to establish roots, it's time to prepare to move again,
Yeah, yes. I'm
right?
so glad I'm done with that part of it. Can I just tell you, I'm so glad that part of it's done. And I didn't, but I have to tell you also, and this is another thing, like for transition to spouses to think about, is that despite us not moving, the people around me still are. And
Yeah.
so I'm staying in one place and they're packing and getting ready. And there's that still that sense of like loss, right?
Yeah.
That sense of
Yeah.
loss and loneliness that's happening because I know they're going and there's nothing I can do to stop that process. And
Right.
I don't have the comfort of knowing, well, I'm going too. So, it's just part of life.
Right.
Now
Right.
I'm the one stuck behind staying and left while everybody
Yeah.
else is piecing out. So I can definitely see where those physical impacts are crazy. 15
Right?
minutes a
And
day.
if you think about it, it just doesn't cost us individually. It costs organizations. So like not having a sense of belonging can increase like have low organizational commitment. There's lower engagement, higher staff turnover for the military. It's lower and decreased military operational readiness. There's like organizational cost to it. And actually, like McKinsey did a survey and found that people left jobs because they didn't feel like their organization or their manager appreciated or valued them. And they felt like their organization lacked a sense of belonging. So employees want and expect stronger relationships and a sense of connection and to be seen and valued
Yeah.
within their organizations too. So it's not just an individual thing. It like affects organizations and units and the community.
Yeah. And there's always like that ripple effect, what you're talking about. So if the military spouse is feeling that certain way, it affects their service member. And then, which then goes into what you were saying, the unit, and then, ultimately up that chain. And then the same thing with the family unit, right? To the
Right.
children, and then moving out that direction as well, or to their friendships. And it's this rippling effect of increased seriousness, is that what we would call it? Seriousness of situation where now you find yourself in depression, or even more into something even more serious where now you're needing some additional assistance or medication, or in order to combat
Mm-hmm.
that loneliness, right? Like, I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
all we talk about it like, oh yeah, it feels a little bit lonely, but it's fine. I'll get over it. But really what you're saying is it's bigger than we think. It's a bigger deal than you might think.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's not just this passing. When we think about loneliness, it's not this passing feeling. It's
Yeah.
this like deep sense that there is something missing, or that like we don't belong, that we don't have, that we're not seen, essentially.
Well, and I'll tell you, I think this is a common mantra for just military spouses in general, that feeling of disconnected. Like, I've got a few friends, I made a few friends, but there's
Yeah.
always that but at the end. There is, and I do feel like that is something that is pervasive. And so when you're looking at transitioning out, I think a lot of times we see it as an opportunity. Oh, I'll finally get to make really great friends. But I also find we don't necessarily have the skill sets.
Yeah.
They're not natural because for however many years you've been in the military, you've not been developing those types of friendships or the
Right.
skill sets to create friends when you're not moving someplace new.
Right.
So,
Right.
post some of the coping strategies, or, what are some strategies that transitioning military spouses can use in terms of, like, first, combating loneliness, and then second, maybe like developing those relationships we've talked about?
So when we think about like these coping skills, one is when we feel the sense of disconnection or loneliness, like our instinct is like immediate we go into protection mode, right? So we're going to do things to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes one of the things that we do is beat ourselves up. Okay, like, okay, I need more friends. So that means I need to just put myself out there. I need to find all the opportunities. I need to volunteer for all the things. I need to do all the things, right?
Yeah.
Our instinct is to do more. But what that does is it just initiates us to show up inauthentically in those relationships, where we start
Mhm.
to accommodate who we are. We make ourselves smaller so that we can fit into wherever the places that we are at, right? So then that just leads us into this feedback mechanism, because they're disingenuine relationships,
It
essentially,
protects
right?
part of that triangle, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Protect that triangle. Yeah.
Right. And so rather than falling into the instinct of doing more, right? I want us to take a breather, right? I want us to take a deep breath, because a deep breath is more than just like, okay, it's nice and let's take a deep breath kind of thing. There is like a vagal nerve that manages our heart rate and our breathing. And when we take a deep breath, it innervates that. So it slows our heart rate down, it slows our breathing down. So it makes our body feel like there's not something attacking us, right? Because when we feel like we're attacked, so we think about like that punch in the gut, that disconnection, that's an attack to us. We interpret that as an attack. So the deep breath reminds us that we're not. And because if we're not, then we don't need to go on like full like defense mode, meaning like I need to do more, or I need to like disengage, or I need to fight her with her, right? Those are like our three strategies. We're either going to do more and people please, or we're going to withdraw and like not even try, like give up on the relationship thing, right? Or we're going to like push people away. So instead of that, we're going to take a deep breath, and then we're going to practice something called RAIN, which is from Tara Brach. And I think exactly. So Tara Brach, and this is a combination and adaptation between Tara Brach and Kristen Neff. Tara Brach wrote this really great book called Radical Compassion, and Kristen Neff is like a self-compassion researcher. Highly recommend their two books, right? So this is kind of a combination of that. So we're going to take a deep breath, and we're going to recognize. So we're going to recognize that we're experiencing something painful. We're going to allow, so we make space. So rather than automatically jumping to moving towards and like people pleasing or withdrawing or pushing people away, we're going to make space for it so that we can ask ourselves and investigate with kindness. Like, what is going on? What am I feeling? What is feeling really scary for me right now? Because if we're having this instinct to protect, something feels scary, right? I might be in that relational cultural or that relational paradox where I want to connect, but connecting feels really scary and vulnerable, so I'm going to pull away, right? So we ask ourselves, what's going on? What am I feeling? What is this trying to tell me? Like we start to ask questions, right? So that we can figure out what we need to do to nurture ourselves. Like what's the issue? If it's I'm feeling really uncertain because we're moving into a transition and I don't have a checklist that tells me what I need to follow, right? Right? So like it's me being uncertain, like uneasy about the uncertainty, and it's less about the relationship, right? So we need to start to ask ourselves questions. And then we take the next step and we nurture. Nurturing is about asking, what is the most kind thing for me to do for myself right now? What is the most compassionate thing for me to do? Compassion and self-compassion gets like a bad rap. Sometimes we think like self-compassion is like warm, fuzzy, like soft teddy bear kind of things, right? Like I need to be accepting and like open. And yes, because self-compassion is that. But also self-compassion is fierce. So sometimes self-compassion looks like a boundary. It means sometimes self-compassion looks like, okay, I've overextended myself and I said yes to too many things right now, right? So there is a yin and yang to compassion. There's this soft, tender kind of mama bear kind of like cuddly energy. And then there's this fierce kind of like protective mama bear energy, right? It's remembering that there are both sides to self-compassion and asking yourself, what would be the most nurturing thing for me right now? Is it to develop and nurture more relationships, or is it to like really focus on the relationships that are really more important to me?
And I think there's a really big push right now to recognize where you're at, right? I mean, with the Olympics last year, we saw a lot of that, where it's recognize where you're at. What are you capable of right now? And if that means you have to say no or go back and say, I know I said yes, but I have to change my mind. I'm so sorry, right? That it's okay to do that, especially if you know that this is something like you're saying, this is like a trauma to you, this feeling of loneliness or this feeling of not belonging. And once you recognize you're in a space where you've overextended or you're not giving yourself what you need, you're people pleasing everyone but you, then it's okay to step back and say, I need to make a change, do things differently.
Yeah, to look at those relationships and say, is this really growth fostering? Is there a mutual empathy and mutual empowerment in this relationship?
Yeah.
Or is it me just giving or
Yeah.
me just taking?
So as you're looking at that transition process then, and as military spouses are leaving these communities, maybe moving to a completely non-military zone, then what would be just like, what's your top tip that you would give them? What is it you would say, like, make sure that you do this, or make sure you recognize this, or, what would you throw at them?
Um,
Kind of putting you on the
I would say, like, make sure that you open yourself up, that you are more than just the one thing, right? I would encourage you to look at the intersectionality of your identity. Start there. Like, Carl Rogers said that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change, right? So we need
Mm,
to look to ourselves to see who we are first, who we are within these relationships, and where would be most nurturing, right? So I think rather than just instinctually, like, okay, this feels wrong, so we need to do more, I think we need to take a step back and say, okay, who am I, what's important to me, and where do I need to grow more in?
Ah, those are beautiful finishing words, Marinelle. Seriously, because I think our instinct is to do more.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening right now live with us or catching the replay, that's the second soundbite I'm going to steal from this, where it's just take a step back, look at who you are, all the different pieces, and what that can do for you before you put yourself out in ways that aren't fulfilling to you
Right.
ultimately. And ultimately increase that sense of loneliness and that lack of belonging,
Right.
because you're not getting the connectedness that you need.
Right.
There were so many good things in this conversation. I mean, I've got this triangle in my head, this rain coping strategy, which, by the way, I'm going to throw that PDF up in LinkedIn. So if you would like a copy of that, you can pull it off our post. I'm going to grab the names of these 2 books that you're recommending, as well as the YouTube video that you
Yeah.
suggested. We're going to put it all in another post as kind of like a recap. So
Love it.
if you're listening, watch for that. I'll drop it on my LinkedIn post, and so you guys can anybody can have access to these suggested resources that Marinelle's given us. Okay, so now to close kind of our session, unfortunately, we have to say goodbye. We have stolen much of Marinelle's time this morning, and I really appreciate it. I want to throw up how you can connect with Marinelle if you would like to. Can you just let everyone know where they can find you and what the best ways to communicate with you are?
Sure, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can just type in my name, Marinelle Reynolds, LCSW. You can also find me on my website, eRemedycounseling.com, or you can shoot me an email at marinelle@eremedycounseling.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, okay. Now this conversation was kind of like a prelude. I really loved this. And it is because it is Mental Health Awareness Month. I thought it very appropriate. And just even the conversation we had today about that sense of community and belonging is going to fit really well. In 2 weeks, I'm going to have Jennifer Barnhill on. And Jennifer was part of a survey that was done where they looked at the community programs that the DoD offers to military spouses and kind of what that looks like, and are they actually working, and do they really create that sense of belonging that people are looking for, or are they just using us as kind of what she called an unpaid workforce, which I actually really loved that term,
Mhm.
in order to support other spouses through these difficult times. And so we're going to have that conversation in just a couple of weeks. I feel like it ties in perfectly with this one in terms of like giving us that foundation for what is important in order to feel that sense of belonging and community. So join me on May 26th for the next SpouseLink live stream. I want to say thank you. Look, we've got people saying thank you. Thank you so much for the great info. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And then, Marinelle, I just want to say thank you to you. I appreciate you being here today, despite not feeling fantastic. You did great. I would never have known if you hadn't told me that you weren't feeling well. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, for having this really important discussion. It's something that we don't really talk about.
It absolutely is not. So let's start that conversation. I'm going to start it on LinkedIn, first of all, with all of those resources that Marinelle just provided us. So if you're interested, pop on and check out my LinkedIn post and we'll move from there. So, all right, we're going to wish everybody a wonderful day. Have a happy Thursday and a great weekend. And we will talk to you later. Bye.